Most people assume that discipline is simply a matter of gritting your teeth and forcing yourself to do things you hate. They treat daily routines like an endurance test, waking up every morning ready to fight against their own mind. They rely entirely on motivation, waiting for a sudden surge of inspiration to carry them through complex tasks, difficult workouts, or long hours of work. When that inspiration inevitably fades, they blame themselves, assuming they simply lack willpower or character. In everyday life, this cycle repeats endlessly. Someone resolves to wake up at 5 in the morning, reads late into the night preparing for an exam, or promises to completely overhaul their diet overnight. For the first 2 or 3 days, adrenaline carries them forward. Every action feels deliberate and charged with excitement. But by the end of the first week, the mental energy begins to drain. The alarm rings in the dark, the familiar comfort of sleep pulls at them, and the sheer effort required to get out of bed feels exhausting. Within a fortnight, the old habits return quietly, leaving behind a persistent sense of failure. Centuries ago, ancient philosophers observed this exact friction in human behavior. Seneca often noted that people spend an immense amount of energy resisting their own impulses, turning every ordinary choice into an exhausting negotiation. He recognized that struggling against yourself is the most inefficient way to live, because willpower is not an endless resource. It is a finite reserve that depletes quickly under stress, fatigue, and distraction. When human nature is forced into constant warfare against itself, nature almost always wins in the end. The mistake lies in how discipline is framed. True self-control is rarely about fighting your desires in the moment. Instead, it is about designing your life so that those exhausting battles never have to take place in the first part of your day. People who seem effortlessly productive are rarely suffering through daily mental battles. They have constructed an environment and a sequence of habits that bypass the need for constant decision-making. Think about how humans naturally navigate physical spaces. When a path is paved and clear, people walk down it without thinking. When a path is blocked by heavy debris or steep mud, people look for easier alternatives. The human brain is naturally engineered to conserve energy. It constantly seeks the path of least resistance, looking for shortcuts that require the least amount of processing power and physical exertion. When a goal requires you to constantly swim upstream against your own biology, burnout is guaranteed. Behavioral science reveals that automatic behaviors bypass the conscious mind entirely. When an action becomes an established pattern, it moves from the brain's decision-making center into the basal ganglia, the region responsible for routine and habit formation. Once a behavior is stored there, executing it requires almost zero conscious effort. You do not wake up and negotiate with yourself about whether you should brush your teeth. You simply do it because the neural pathway is deep, paved, and unobstructed. The entire secret to building sustainable discipline is understanding how to build those exact pathways for hard tasks. Instead of trying to force your way through difficult work with raw intensity, the objective is to lower the friction of starting until the action feels natural. When a habit requires no negotiation, it stops feeling like a chore and starts feeling like an ordinary part of your day. Consider how people handle their physical spaces on a typical workday. A desk covered in loose papers, open tabs, and ringing phones creates immediate mental friction. Every single object in that field of view demands a small fraction of attention. The brain has to process the clutter, decide what to ignore, and manually push past the visual noise just to focus on a single task. By the time actual work begins, a noticeable amount of mental energy has already been consumed by the environment itself. This invisible drain happens everywhere. In a kitchen designed with snacks sitting on the counter, resisting temptation requires a constant, conscious choice. Every time someone walks past, Their brain registers the cue, evaluates the desire, and exerts energy to look away. That repeated micro-decision wears down self-control over the course of an afternoon. By evening, when discipline is needed most for deep work or personal projects, the internal battery is completely drained. Designing an environment to bypass this fatigue is one of the most effective strategies for long-term consistency. When the tools required for a task are visible, organized, and ready to use, the barrier to entry drops significantly. If a notebook is left open on a desk with a pen resting directly on top of it, walking into the room creates an immediate invitation to write. The physical cue triggers the habit loop before hesitation can set in. Psychologists often refer to this as reducing friction. Just as oil allows mechanical parts to glide past each other without grinding down, environmental design allows actions to happen without mental resistance. When a runner lays out their clothes, shoes, and water bottle the night before, they remove the morning decisions that usually provide an excuse to skip a workout. They wake up, see the equipment waiting, and step into the routine before their conscious mind has time to invent reasons to stay in bed. Human beings tend to overestimate their own resilience. They assume that if they are strong-minded enough, they can place themselves in distracting environments and simply ignore the temptation. But history and behavioral science show that avoiding temptation is infinitely more effective than resisting it. People who maintain steady habits over years are rarely fighting daily battles of willpower. They have simply constructed an ecosystem where the right choice is the easiest choice available. Look at how professional craftsmen or artisans set up their workshops. Every tool has a dedicated place. The workspace is cleared of clutter before the day ends. When they arrive the next morning, they do not waste time searching for instruments or clearing away yesterday's mess. The environment speaks to them, quietly guiding their hands toward the work. That same principle applies to mental habits, creative projects, and personal routines. When you stop treating discipline as a test of moral character and start treating it as an engineering problem, everything changes. The question shifts from, "Why am I so lazy?" to "What friction is making this task harder than it needs to be?" Once you begin removing the obstacles between you and your daily actions, the need for constant motivation simply disappears. People often make the mistake of trying to change everything at once. They announce that starting Monday, their entire life will look different. They will wake up early, read daily, work out for an hour, cook every meal from scratch, and eliminate every distraction. For about 4 days, the sheer novelty of the transformation keeps them moving. But because so many new behaviors demand conscious attention all at once, the brain's processing capacity is quickly overwhelmed. The moment one part of the routine falters, the entire structure collapses under the weight of its own complexity. Sustainable change relies on a much quieter mechanism, compounding simplicity. Instead of building a massive, fragile tower of new habits, effective discipline starts with a single, unglamorous anchor. It is the decision to do one small thing consistently until it requires no thought whatsoever. Only when that single behavior becomes automatic does the next layer get added. Consider how physical infrastructure is built. A massive bridge is never constructed by dropping heavy steel spans into the air all at once. Workers drive deep, solid pillars into the earth, one by one, letting each foundation cure and settle before adding weight above it. Human habits operate under the exact same structural law. When a routine has a deep foundation, it can handle stress, fatigue, and unexpected interruptions without breaking. In everyday life, this looks like committing to write just one paragraph instead of a whole chapter, or doing a single stretch instead of a full workout. The secret of this approach lies in tricking the brain's threat detection system. The amygdala, the part of the brain that reacts to stress and discomfort, views large, complex tasks as a threat to energy conservation. When faced with a massive undertaking, It releases subtle signals of anxiety and resistance, prompting procrastination. But when a task is shrunk down so small that it feels almost trivial, the brain registers zero threat. Once the action has begun, however, human momentum takes over. Physicists note that an object at rest stays at rest, but an object in motion tends to stay in motion. The hardest part of almost any task is the threshold between doing nothing and taking the first step. By lowering that threshold to a level that feels effortless, you bypass the hesitation that keeps people stuck. More often than not, once you sit down to write one paragraph, you find yourself writing 3 or 4. This explains why people who achieve remarkable consistency over decades rarely talk about massive displays of courage. They talk about boring, repeatable minimum standards. They focus on never missing twice. If an unexpected disruption breaks their routine on a Tuesday, they do not let it ruin the rest of the week. They simply return to the baseline on Wednesday, treating the interruption as a normal part of life rather than a moral failure. When you remove the expectation of perfection, discipline stops feeling like a fragile glass sculpture that shatters at the first sign of trouble. It becomes flexible, resilient, and deeply integrated into who you are. Identity is the invisible anchor of all lasting behavior. Most people try to change their habits from the outside in, focusing entirely on the outcome they want to achieve. They set a goal to lose a certain amount of weight, finish a specific project, or read a designated number of books. While having a target provides direction, it does nothing to change the underlying belief system of the person pursuing it. If someone views themselves as naturally disorganized or lazy, every single action they take requires a constant internal argument against their own self-image. In everyday conversation, this reveals itself through language. People say things like, "I am trying to become a disciplined person," or "I am attempting to break my bad habits." That phrasing carries a subtle, powerful assumption that the current self is inherently undisciplined, and that discipline is an external mask being forced onto an unwilling nature. As long as that core identity remains unchanged, any behavioral shift feels like an act of acting. Eventually, the person gets tired of playing a role and reverts to what feels natural. True behavioral change happens in reverse. It begins when someone shifts their internal narrative from what they want to achieve to who they are. Instead of focusing on running 3 times a week, the focus shifts to simply identifying as someone who takes care of their physical health. When a choice arises, the decision is no longer filtered through a difficult question like, "Do I have the energy to do this right now?" Instead, it becomes a simple question of alignment. What would someone who values their health do in this exact moment? Psychologists call this identity-based consistency. When your habits match your self-image, the friction of decision-making disappears. A person who identifies as a reader does not need to negotiate with themselves to open a book in the evening. Reading is simply what people like them do. A craftsman does not debate whether to check their work for flaws. Precision is part of their professional identity. This explains why short-term motivation programs so often fail. They target the surface level of behavior while leaving the foundational identity untouched. Someone can follow a strict routine for 30 days because of an external reward or a burst of enthusiasm. But the moment the environment shifts or pressure mounts, they snap back to their baseline identity. They return to old patterns because those patterns feel safe, familiar, and consistent with how they view themselves. Building a new identity does not require a dramatic, cinematic awakening. It is accumulated through tiny, unrecorded pieces of evidence collected over time. Every single time you follow through on a small commitment, you cast a vote for the type of person you want to become. You do not need unanimous agreement from your past self. You simply need a small majority of votes. Over weeks and months, those accumulated votes rewrite your internal story until the behavior that once felt forced becomes your natural state of being. The human brain is wired for immediate feedback. For most of human history, actions had immediate consequences. Gathering food meant eating that day, building a shelter meant protection from the weather that night, and missing a warning sign meant immediate danger. The modern world, however, operates on delayed returns. Studying for an exam today yields a grade weeks later. Saving money now secures financial stability decades down the road. Working out consistently produces physical changes over many months. This mismatch between biological wiring and modern reality creates a constant psychological trap. The brain's emotional center craves instant gratification, while the logical mind understands the value of long-term investment. When someone sits down to work on a difficult project with no immediate reward in sight, the emotional center begins rebelling. It whispers that checking a phone, looking at notifications, or stepping away for a distraction will feel much better right now. Because the long-term benefit is invisible and abstract, it loses out to the immediate, tangible comfort of procrastination. Mastering discipline requires learning how to bridge this gap between present actions and future rewards. One effective method is making the future consequence feel immediate and real. Instead of thinking about vague long-term goals, people who maintain high consistency focus on protecting their future self from unnecessary stress. They realize that every time they procrastinate, they are borrowing time and energy from tomorrow, forcing their future self to pay heavy interest on a debt they chose to create today. Consider how people manage financial resources. Someone who views money purely as a tool for immediate pleasure spends everything they earn, treating tomorrow as a problem for later. Someone with financial discipline views money as stored energy, choosing to allocate it toward future security. The underlying mechanism is identical when applied to time, focus, and energy. Discipline is essentially the art of refusing to steal from your future self for the comfort of your present self. Another strategy involves creating artificial immediate rewards for long-term behaviors. Because the brain responds so strongly to dopamine spikes, tying a small, immediate positive reinforcement to a difficult task helps bridge the motivational gap. This does not mean indulging in destructive habits as a reward, but rather pairing hard work with clean, structured satisfaction, such as taking a deliberate, guilt-free break in a quiet space only after completing a specific block of focused execution. When you begin to see time as a continuous stream rather than isolated moments, daily choices look entirely different. The small, boring tasks performed today stop feeling like pointless burdens and start feeling like direct deposits into an account that your future self will rely on. One of the most hidden drains on daily discipline is the sheer volume of choices a person makes before noon. Modern life forces the brain to process an unnatural amount of information and make countless minor decisions, from what to wear and what to eat, to which emails to answer first. Most people do not realize that every single one of these choices consumes a small portion of their mental energy. By the time they finally sit down to do something difficult, like studying a new skill or working on a personal project, they feel a strange, heavy resistance. We see this pattern unfold in ordinary moments all the time. Think about a parent who comes home after a long, demanding day at work. They walk into the kitchen, open the refrigerator door, and just stand there staring at the shelves for a full minute. They have plenty of food in the house, and they are genuinely hungry, but they end up closing the door and ordering a pizza instead. This is not laziness. The brain has simply reached a state of decision fatigue. It refuses to process one more variable or make one more choice, so it demands the easiest possible escape route. If your daily discipline requires you to make a conscious choice every single time you need to act, It will inevitably collapse when you are tired. You cannot outsmart biology. When the mind is exhausted, it will always reject difficult decisions. More than 100 years ago, the psychologist William James noticed something fascinating about this exact problem. He argued that our main goal in life should be to make our useful actions completely automatic as quickly as possible. He believed that the more details of our daily life we can hand over to effortless habit, the more our higher mind is set free to focus on actual deep work. If you are still deciding whether or not to exercise or what time to sit at your desk, you are wasting the very energy you need to perform those tasks well. Keeping too many routine decisions open is like leaving dozens of heavy programs running in the background of a computer. Even if you are not actively looking at them, they are draining the battery. You are essentially paying daily rent on unresolved choices. The people who seem the most disciplined have simply removed the burden of choice from their daily routines. They eat the same standard meals for breakfast and lunch. They wear variations of the same comfortable clothes. They go to the gym on the same days, at the same time, without asking themselves if they feel like it. By standardizing the ordinary parts of their day, they protect their limited mental energy for the tasks that actually matter. They make the hard things feel easier by completely eliminating the small, unnecessary choices that slowly wear them down. Another invisible barrier to building automatic habits is the way people handle their own intentions. Human beings are deeply social creatures, and the brain is highly sensitive to the approval of the group. Because of this, it is very natural to want to share your goals with the people around you. When someone decides to change their life, the excitement makes them want to tell their friends, post about it online, or discuss it with their family. But this natural urge hides a psychological trap. When you announce a difficult goal to the world, people usually react with immediate praise. They tell you how proud they are, or how amazing your new plan sounds. In that exact moment, your brain releases a rush of dopamine, giving you the emotional reward of achievement before you have actually done any of the required work. You can spot this dynamic in almost any workplace. Someone will walk into the office on a Monday morning and loudly announce that they are starting a strict new health program. They bring their expensive new water bottle, talk about their early alarm clock, and share their complex meal plan in the break room. For 2 days, they ride the high of everyone's encouragement. But by Thursday, the enthusiasm is gone. The new routine feels like a massive burden, and the expensive water bottle is left sitting on a desk while they return to their old habits. The brain struggles to distinguish between the satisfaction of doing the work and the satisfaction of being praised for the intention. When you receive early praise, the internal tension that drives you to actually complete the task disappears. You feel successful just for having the idea. This is essentially living on borrowed progress. You are spending the emotional reward of a goal you have not yet earned. True discipline thrives in quiet environments. When you stop telling people what you are going to do, you remove the artificial high of premature praise. You force yourself to confront the reality of the work itself. Without an audience to applaud your intentions, you quickly discover whether you actually want the result, or if you simply wanted the social validation of looking ambitious. Working in silence also removes the heavy pressure of managing other people's expectations. When you announce a grand plan, you suddenly have an audience watching to see if you will fail. This adds unnecessary anxiety to a process that is already difficult. If you stumble or miss a day, you now feel the sting of public embarrassment, which often causes people to abandon the goal completely just to escape the shame. When a habit is built quietly, a missed day is just a missed day. There is no audience to disappoint. You simply wake up the next morning and correct the course without any added emotional weight. By keeping your intentions entirely to yourself during the early stages, you give the habit the time and space it needs to take root and become automatic, far away from the fragile noise of other people's opinions. When people hit a rough patch in their routine, they usually assume the problem is a lack of willpower. They think back to the days when their energy was high and assume that the current slowdown is a permanent loss of drive. They try to fix the drop by working even harder, pushing themselves through exhaustion, and demanding strict perfection from a mind that is clearly overloaded. But that approach usually leads straight to complete burnout, making it even harder to return to the routine later. Discipline is not a straight line. It is much closer to a rhythm that naturally rises and falls. If you look at how people operate over long stretches of time, nobody maintains peak performance every single day. The people who achieve lasting results are not the ones who never stumble. They are the ones who know how to recover quickly when things fall apart. Consider how an experienced sailor handles a sudden shift in the wind. They do not get angry at the weather, nor do they try to force the boat in a direction the wind is blocking. Instead, they adjust the sails, accept the temporary change in course, and wait for the right moment to turn back toward their destination. They understand that fighting the elements directly is a waste of energy. In everyday life, a similar shift in perspective changes everything about how you handle setbacks. If you miss a workout, skip a reading session, or eat poorly for a day, the worst thing you can do is treat it as total failure. The moment you decide that a single slip-up has ruined your progress, you give yourself an excuse to quit entirely. This is known in behavioral psychology as the what the hell effect. Once someone feels they have already broken their streak, the mental barrier disappears, and they indulge in the very behavior they were trying to avoid. Maintaining discipline requires a simple, unbreakable rule: never miss twice. Missing once is an accident, an interruption, or a normal part of living in an unpredictable world. Missing twice is the beginning of a brand new, unwanted habit. If your routine breaks on a Tuesday, your only job is to return to the baseline on Wednesday. You do not need to make up for lost time by doing twice as much work. You do not need to punish yourself with a brutal schedule. You simply step back onto the path without any dramatic emotional reaction. Treating consistency as a flexible system rather than a fragile test of character removes the fear of failure. When you know you are allowed to stumble as long as you do not stop moving, the pressure lifts. Discipline stops feeling like a prison sentence and starts feeling like a steady, lifelong practice. One of the greatest enemies of long-term discipline is the quiet illusion of instant results. Because modern technology delivers everything instantly, messages arrive in milliseconds, videos play the second you click them, and food appears at your door within minutes. The human brain has grown deeply impatient. It expects growth, skill, and transformation to follow the exact same timeline. When someone starts a new habit, they often expect visible proof of their progress within a week or two. They want to see the scale move, the project finish, or the skill master itself immediately. But real human development operates on a completely different timeline. It is invisible, slow, and cumulative, much like the way a tree grows underground long before its roots break the surface. Think about how a mason builds a stone wall. For the first few days, the work looks almost identical to when they started. The stones are heavy, the mortar is messy, and from a distance, the wall barely looks taller than it did yesterday. If you judged the progress by looking at the wall every morning, you would feel like nothing was changing. Yet beneath that visible surface, a solid, interlocking structure is forming, block by block, until it reaches a height where it can suddenly withstand heavy pressure. People who struggle with discipline often quit right before this invisible threshold. They work consistently for 10 days or 3 weeks, look around, and feel disappointed because their life hasn't transformed dramatically. They do not realize that the early stages of any habit are entirely about building structural integrity, not producing visible outcomes. In everyday routines, This means learning to judge your success by your actions rather than your results. You cannot always control whether a project succeeds immediately, whether a skill feels natural right away, or how fast your body changes. But you can completely control whether you showed up and did the work today. When you shift your focus from the final outcome to the daily process, the anxiety of waiting for results vanishes. You stop looking at the clock, stop checking for instant validation, and simply settle into the rhythm of the work. You begin to trust that if you handle the inputs correctly every single day, the outputs will take care of themselves in due time. That shift turns discipline from a heavy, exhausting obligation into a quiet, steady rhythm. You wake up, you clear the friction, you protect your energy from unnecessary distractions, and you do the work not because you are waiting for a reward, but because it is simply who you have chosen to become. The ultimate test of discipline is not how you perform when everything is going well. It is how you operate on ordinary, grey days when nothing feels exciting, when motivation is completely absent, and when the enthusiasm that started the journey has long since faded. Most people assume that high achievers are constantly fueled by passion and inspiration. In reality, true consistency begins precisely where inspiration ends. Look at how people handle routine tasks in any craft or profession. A writer does not wait for a lightning bolt of genius to sit down at the desk. They sit down because it is the scheduled time to write, regardless of whether their mind feels sharp or dull. An athlete does not train only when they feel energized. They show up to practice because the habit demands their presence, even when their muscles ache. They understand that waiting to feel like doing hard work is a trap that keeps people trapped in perpetual starting lines. When you remove the requirement for emotional readiness, you free yourself from the tyranny of your own changing moods. You stop treating your feelings as reliable indicators of what you should or should not do. Feelings are temporary, whether patterns passing through the mind. Discipline is the structure of the house that remains standing long after the storm has passed. This is why simplifying your approach to daily life matters so much. When your routines are streamlined, when your workspace is clear of friction, when your choices are minimized, and when your identity is aligned with your actions, you do not need a surge of emotion to get moving. You simply step into the rhythm because the path ahead of you is completely paved and unobstructed. The journey of building self-mastery is never about achieving a permanent state of perfection where you never feel lazy, distracted, or tired. That place does not exist. Instead, discipline is the quiet, daily practice of returning to your baseline. It is the steady commitment to clear the obstacles, protect your mental energy, and take one small, unglamorous step forward, day after quiet day, until the life you want becomes your natural reality.